Hi, I'm Diana.
I'm Sabrina.
And we're here to talk about D&D.
Mm-hmm.
We're here to talk about my D&D campaign, Dark Fun.
Mm-hmm. We've planned to have an entire run of podcast-like videos to explain the wonders of D&D.
And the fact that it's old and has gone through lots of fun.
Mm-hmm. We have two interesting different examples and outlooks, depending on who you're asking, on how the world of Dungeons & Dragons works, and we figured we would share it with the world.
That's right. Back when I went to college, when the world was young and dinosaurs roamed the land, i.e. the 70s, I went to college and I went to a fantasy class because I love Tolkien. And the fantasy class ended with a special project.
So you're saying that you got it because of Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, Lord of the Rings, that's my basis. That's the books that I came from. But the fantasy, I like all sorts of fantasy. My mother reads all this science fiction, but I like the fantasy. Yeah, she read like crazy. But I read the fantasy. I never liked the science fiction. She finally got me to read something, and it was fantasy books. So I took this class, and at the end of the class, they had extra credit projects that you could give. And this girl stood up, and she said, I've got this game, and it's called Dungeons & Dragons, and we all pretend to play characters. And this was back in 77. The game came out in like 76, so nobody had heard about it.
So you're saying you got extra credit for playing Dungeons & Dragons?
My hand was like, oh, pick me! I gotta know about this.
What a lucky experience.
It was wonderful. And we played for, 10 minutes because all she was doing was demonstrating. She couldn't take longer than that. And then that was the end because it was the end of class.
It was a one-shot, you're saying?
It was totally a one-shot, and it was the end of class. I couldn't even... I had 5 minutes to talk to her, and that was it.
And poof, she was gone.
And I'm like, no, this is my life. So
the spark was hit.
Yes, and this was at the end of the winter semester. There was a winter break, and it was Christmas. And I went home, and I said, Mom, I have to have this Dungeons & Dragons game for Christmas. And my mother went, well, we'll see. As grandmas do. Well,
as parents do.
So she got it for me for Christmas. I still have the box in the back.
The original first edition.
The first edition stuff got later because I was so hungry for it. The first thing I got was the second edition box. It was a box so that it explained it well, which was great. And when the next semester started, I showed up at the science fiction club called the Order of Leibowitz. And there she was. And I went, I've got all this D&D stuff. Let's play some more. And she went, great, because she wanted to as well. So I started my game back in 1978, and I have never stopped.
So that means you have been playing the same campaign with the same characters since the 70s.
Since the 70s.
And this game has continued on to present day in our Lord of year 2021.
That's right. Same game.
Same game.
And it's really
over 40 years old.
It's really weird when you're like, oh yes, my first characters, because they're rooted in some of the very first rules. And in those days, there weren't a lot of rules that covered a lot of things. It was like, are you a wizard? Yes. Are you an elf? That was a character class back in the day. Elf.
What did elf do?
Elf could do the wizard and the fighter stuff. Everybody wanted to play an elf, obviously. Including me, because I had elves everywhere.
This is before they tried to give humans a little bit of slack.
Yeah, humans were boring.
And there still are to this day.
So there I was with, I'm at college, okay? So college was great because there was always a ton of people who were like, what are you doing? We'd play in the cafeteria. We'd play later in the evening. And the people who were all in the dorms would come over and go, why are you rolling those dice? And why do they have...
What's going on here?
Why do they have different sides than just 6 dice? 6-sided.
This isn't gambling.
No. So we had always a fresh group of people to come play. And I, because I wanted to play, looked around, and you looked around and you're like, where's the DMs? Well, the only person I knew who was the DM was that girl.
One girl.
One girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, okay then. I'll be a DM. I could do this. I've got the books. I see what I'm supposed to do. Here are monsters. Here are character class. Everybody else at the tables or in the group seems to know what's going on. So I'm like, I'll DM. And then I suddenly had, a table full of people. Oh, yeah, you're going to DM? Okay, Diana's playing. What are we playing? Well, it's called Dark Fawn. Oh. Because the first few campaigns, there was Greyhawk and there was Blackmore. Mm-hmm. That was it.
Those were what were those?
They were the designer's home game.
So the creators of the game called their games that.
That. Blackmore was Dave Arneson's and Greyhawk was Gary Gygax's.
Okay.
Everybody knows Gary these days. Dave, not so much. I'll talk about that later because I love Dave.
So inspiration from those, you named your game.
Dark Fawn, because, it sounded...
Two simple words
come together, immediately says Dungeons and Dragons to me. So, Dark Fawn. And then over the summer, my summer vacation was 3 weeks with my family, and we were out on a boat in the middle of nowhere. I mean, the middle of nowhere. We didn't really even have electricity, really. We had a big battery, but and you're out in the middle of nowhere with your sisters. Yeah, I love my sisters, really. I'm just kidding. I love you, Sandy. Love you, Trish.
Good save.
So you're out in the middle of nowhere, and you're like, well, what am I going to do? I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, I can't teach my sisters to play Dungeons and Dragons. They're like, what the heck?
I've noticed.
So I said, I'm going to make a dungeon. Mm-hmm. And boy, did I.
I noticed a few things. There's something that, back in the day, you said it was super hard to find a DM.
Yes.
Even in modern day, it is extremely hard to find a DM. I end up running most of the campaigns I'm in because nobody else dares to want to play.
Yay! The legacy passes.
It's your fault,
Yeah, thank goodness.
It's absolutely your fault.
I take deep credit for this.
Phooey.
Well, I started a dungeon, and I spent 3 weeks making it. And it was glorious. It was wonderful. And it was just, I still have a copy of it. I'll show you later. But in those days, everybody had a dungeon. And then you played your dungeon, and then you were done. You got your experience, played your dungeon, you got the treasure, killed a bunch of monsters, and you were done. And then I found a series of books called Arduin and Grimoire. I'm probably mispronouncing that. But I've said Arduin and Grimoire for 40 years, so I'm going to say it that way. By Dave Hardgrave. And in Dave Hardgrave's books, he said, you should have an entire world. And I went, we should? Now, certainly, Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax, the creators, said we should have a whole world, but they didn't quite share it in the very earliest of days. They had their own maps, and they had their own ideas, and they had their own directions, but they could only explain so much in the pages that were there. So the Arduin and Grimoire books were like, there's maps, there's a city, there's stuff, and this is obvious these days, but back in the annals when dinosaurs roamed the lands, I was the first person in my whole area who said, here's the map, this is where you live. Oh, can we raid this city? No, they will kill you, and you're supposed to live here.
Proof, though, that you don't need a full world in order to get started.
No, if you're just getting started, all you need are a bunch of players who want to play and some monsters and treasure and corridors to go down and explore.
That's all you need.
Doors to kick open. I still have that encounters I still have. Kick open the doors, the corridors, and kill monsters and get their stuff. But
best way to do.
We weren't murder hobos, though. We all had a place that we lived. They all lived in town. They were all bad monsters. It was okay to kill them. So we had a blast, and I started creating NPCs because way back you could have somebody who would send you on a quest, but you never saw them again. They gave you the treasure, and then it was done. And I'm like, oh, I have to make up these characters. I have to have a dragon lady because I love dragons, and I have to have an elf kingdom. And at this point, I had my ideas for my main elf character, but he came in later.
And to the point that you've developed these characters, and over the years, they've had different character developments. Characters have had marriages and divorces and children. Some characters got completely flipped upside down depending on where they went.
Oh gosh, yes. The interaction of the players. One of the things that you find out as you're DMing is that the players do crazy things. And then you're the one who has to overcome it or figure out where it's going. But sometimes when they are affecting the game correctly, that's where they like it the best. And if you've affected the game so that they are affecting the NPCs, well, now the NPCs are growing. And now the NPCs are there to say, well, wait a minute now. This guy could also do this job. Or this guy suddenly likes these people because they went out of their way to make certain to bring him the orchids that he likes.
And speaking of players,
yes.
Since you've had a game for over 40 years, you've had multiple generations of players.
I have.
And each of your original NPCs have interacted with these players in different ways.
Yes.
How does that go?
I have the easy setup because they're all in town, and then it's easy to try and tie the players' characters to some of these guys. So you need to learn magic, so you better have a master mage. Well, now you've got characters interacting with the magic university. You're a cleric. What faith are you in? So now you have people interacting with the NPCs that way. The NPCs are very real to me, and I draw them. I have a sketchbook. And sketchbooks, I'm an artist. I do a lot of art. And sketchbooks are filled with character pictures.
Yeah.
So for me, I stand out with, and now I'm looking through my book. Oh, look, it's Chandari. Oh my God, you'll be hearing a lot about him because that's the way my world works. But now I've got, they're real to me. I draw them in situations. I draw them in situations with the players. I draw, player characters. I don't
Close enough, it's fine.
Close enough. So I'm always attempting to see what's going on in their lives, and therefore I know what's going on or what's about to be going on with the characters' lives.
The connection between your characters and the NPCs that they interact with.
Right. Are through story, through actions, and certainly through my artwork. So I love my, and they come and go. I had this fervent character that I carried through for quite a while. He started out as an apprentice, and he got up to journeyman, and he got up to master, and he got married, and he's amazing. Meamente. And lately, Meamente is happy. And I don't want to interrupt his happiness. So he's got kids, he's got the lady.
He went through his whole character arc.
He went through his whole character arc, and now he's got a good, prestigious job, and he's still present in the campaign. But interestingly enough, I had hooked him to a couple of the players and a couple of the players' characters. And the joy of having him hooked to them was he was very good to use. There's a lot of stories, there's a lot of movement and character development with him. Those players have retired those characters. And Meamente's kind of retired. I miss him sometimes, but he's happy and he's okay. So I'm like, all right, there's Meamente. He's a good boy.
You just need a young whippersnapper to go to the old master and say, "Teach me, you old master." And then the old master would be like, "Nyeh."
Yeah. And I have storybooks. They're way in the back over there.
You see that entire whole collection of stuff?
Roll of spiral bound things. Those are fanzines.
Made for this one campaign.
Made for my story games. 17 of them,
and it's only really spread between the players. 5-10
people at most. I met a nice girl at Dragon Con who I gave one of the storybooks to her just as a lark kind of thing, because we've been talking D&D. I'm like, oh my God, I talk D&D with people. And she fell in love with Ko. I'm like, oh, the story's all about Girth, so you like Girth, right? She's like, this story is amazing.
We'll have to hold off on the character stories for a second.
But she was interested in the books, so she got copies of them, but I rarely...
It is I'll point to say that not many Dungeons and Dragons campaigns either live long enough or have such a level of stuff where the DM will make fanzines.
Yeah.
Or have other works from the players who interact with the fanzines. Like, you have other players who are artists who also contribute art. And this is just made for, like, 10 people.
10 people.
And that's it. But that's because you're having fun.
You can only sit 10 people. I mean, I've been up to 12, but right now I'm at 6. 6 is a good number. But, you start saying, oh my gosh, I have a game and we have two players. I'm like, you should get more players. There's a ton of them out there.
I can only stand 3 right now.
Really?
I can only stand 3. It is a nightmare to try and handle more than that.
Oh, okay. Well, your game is very frantic.
Yes, but I have very frantic players. I'm not saying any bad things about them. I love them with all my heart.
My players started at college, so I had a regular group of players. And then we all kind of would graduate from college. And after a while, well, I'm not playing at college anymore. Where am I going to play? Oh, I think I'll play at my house. Okay, we'll play at my house. We played here. Then I got married and moved to a different house. And then we played there. And then we bought this house when my parents retired. And now we're playing here again. But for a while, I had the same group of players. But sometimes, somebody's like, well, that was fun. I'm done now. And then I need more players. At one point, I was down to 2. And I'm like, I need more players. I went to a convention. It was a local comic book convention. I put a sign on my table. Local GM wanting more players. I could have taken it to the gaming stores, put it up. But I had a couple people come by and point at the sign. You're local? Yes, I'm at this location, Crossroads. And he's like, I'm close enough to come gaming. I said, it's Sunday, it's these days. And you kind of ask them, what's your fanish resume? How much D&D have you played? What are you interested in? And after a while, we got Bob that way. And then we had Al, because Bob brought Al. And then the next thing you know is like, okay, I need, suddenly Scott's there. The person who's been with me the longest, I will not say she's my oldest player because, well, now I'm getting into who's old and who's not. I'm old. Okay.
No, as in longest playing.
Longest playing character. Sandy we picked up, was it college? Near the end of college?
Because she was with the whole gaggle of pals back then.
We found her through a comic book. She's a professional comic book inker. And we found her at a comic book convention, and it turned out that she knew people that Dave knew. Dave husband, who used to play and doesn't play anymore.
Well, it's hard to play with someone you're dating with if you're the DM.
Actually, he got away with a lot of stuff because it was like he knew my head really well.
That's the trick. This is why you don't DM and put your partner
interest,
your partner as a player.
It's much nicer when you're married and your partner understands gaming to say, okay, I have this idea for a game. Let me bounce it off of you to see what you would think. And he's very good at storytelling, so he'll help me sometimes.
With that being said, though, if you have a partner and you find a DM and you both play in their campaign, you could use that to your advantage.
Oh gosh, it was easy.
That or you try and betray each other, but that's the scandal of things.
It all depends on what you want to do and how long you want to manage it. But there is turnover of players, and there's a lot of them out there looking for games. And on the internet these days, especially since I'm looking for local players, I have a basement. It is full of stuff. And we game here until the pandemic hit. And now we'll be back to gaming here soon because we're all vaccinated. But the idea of online, there's all kinds of things. I've got a guy in Florida who was an old player, moved to Florida, now he's playing with us again. And we have a computer set up at the end of the table so that he can come in. He brought his daughter, now I've got her. I have a 9-year-old kid who's like, I want to play too. I'm like, okay. He's very enthusiastic.
Oh my God, Ojo. Who knew this was going to be so long? We'll go to the next part.